Ladies and gentlemen, um, we are going to start our session, The Art of Short Story, and we have our panelists here with us, Ms. Usha KR and Ms. Hansda Sowvendra Shekhar. And I'll just read a short bio about the panelists. Usha KR is the author of the novels Boys from Good Families, 2019, Monkey Man, 2010, A Girl and a River, The Chosen, The Sojourn. Her novels have been listed for several awards, including the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, the Man Asia, and the DSC Prize for South Asian Literature. A Girl and a River won the Vodafone Crossword Award in 2007. Monkey Man was shortlisted for the DSC Prize for South Asian Literature in 2012. Usha began her journey as a writer with short stories. Her stories were published in various magazines and journals, including Femina, Debonair, New Quest, and Deccan Herald. Her short story, Sepia Tones, won the Katha Award for Creative Writing back in 1995. More recently, her short story, Elixir, was included in Boo, an anthology of paranormal tales, in 2017. The Boy to Chase the Crows Away was among the best Asian short stories in 2017. Kitab, Singapore. Please welcome Usha KR. Mr. Sowvendra lives in Jharkhand and is the author of 4 books. The Mysterious Ailment of Rupi Baski, which is a novel published in 2014. The Adivasi Will Not Dance, collection of short stories, 2015. Jwala Kumar and the Gift of Fire, Adventures of Champak Bagh, it's a novel for children, 2018. And My Father's Garden, which is a novel published in 2018. The Mysterious Ailment of Rupi Baski won the Sahitya Akademi Yuva Puraskar Award for Young Writers and was longlisted for the International Dublin Literary Award. The Adivasi Will Not Dance was shortlisted for the Hindu Prize. My Father's Garden was shortlisted for the JCB Prize for Literature and won the Best Book Prize at the Likho Awards, presented by the Humsafar Trust. Jwala Kumar and the Gift of Fire was shortlisted for the Crossword Award. Mr. Sowvendra has 2 more books for children forthcoming, Who's There and Sumi, Buddhi and Sugi. Both are picture books for children. Please welcome Mr. Sowvendra.
As forms of, as literary forms. And the ingredients that go into short stories and novels are very much the same. It's just that the proportion and the intensity, they vary. So, for instance, if you're writing a novel, you know that you have 80,000 words or 100,000 words for you to use up. You have 200 or 300 pages. Whereas when you're writing a short story, it is 5,000 words or maybe less. So, again, it puts you in a different frame of mind. So, the ingredients are the same, but you know that you have to husband your resources more effectively. So possibly the result, when you write a short story, it is more pungent, it is more impactful. It makes a certain point. I would say that a short story, I think, would depend more on language. It is more language intensive, given that the short story is short. And also, in a novel, the Hindi short story writer, he said a novel tends to tell you everything and the details are used for a cumulative effect. But a novel, that is a novel, but a short story, each detail is a pulsing nerve center on its own. It is meaningful on its own, so it has to stand alone and make sense.
So the language and the crispness.
Yes, right. Actually, if you look at the short story on a spectrum, on the one hand, on one side of the spectrum is a short story which is akin to a novel. The British writer Kingsley Amis, the author of Lucky Jim, and who also wrote short stories, he said his kind of short story is very akin, shares a lot with the novel. Of course, the scale is different, but the internal proportions of, say, narrative, dialogue, description, they would be very similar and the effect would be similar. So you could expand a short story into a novel. And as you travel along the spectrum, you have, say, something that another British writer of short stories, very prolific, V.S. Pritchett, he says a short story is something that is glimpsed out of the corner of your eye in passing. So it may be just a glance, but the writer has to bring everything she has to bear into that glance, you know, your powers of observation, the clarity of perception, how you're going to build character. So I guess that's it. That is about the short
So
story.
that's well answered, yeah. And Mr. Sowvendra, your take on this?
Yes, thank you so much. Both short stories as well as novels, they have their own qualities, but I am here thinking as a writer, not as a reader, and I often lose patience when I'm writing longer stuff. And like Usha mentioned, while you're writing a novel, you often have this word count in your mind, like it has to be 80,000 or
Yes,
something.
yes.
Sometimes I lose patience even while writing 30,000 words. So for me, I think short story are more effective, and I often try, like when I write short stories, I try to, like Usha said again, while writing a short story, we have to use our resources very wisely. So that is what I try to do. I try to, use my resources as wisely, as judiciously as possible, and in that small, frame that I receive, I try to tell my story in, that small space. Also, I'm not a full-time writer. I also have a job. That is why I often do not get time to write.
Okay.
So for me, short stories or shorter works, I think they hold a lot of importance.
Okay. And about real life experiences, do you think real life experiences play an important role in writing short stories?
Yeah, totally. Like in my collection of short stories, the Adivas were not done. They were all my observations.
Okay.
They grew out of some kind of frustration on seeing some conditions around me. So of course, real life experience, we cannot cut ourselves out of what is happening around us.
Is there something called pure fiction then, or is it all what you have?
I do not think anything is pure fiction. Even if it is
Okay.
speculative fiction or science fiction, it is a statement that we are making in
Okay.
response to what is happening around us. Otherwise, where are we going to get ideas from? Writing
Okay.
is a very a job done in isolation, but the ideas that you get it from what is around you. So, of
Okay.
course, real life plays a very important role, huge role.
Okay. And Ms. Usha, could you share any of your life experiences which inspired you to write a particular story?
Actually, if you step back from the question a little, Sowvendra has answered it. The immediate prompt that the author has to write a story, that is your experience. So in a way, what the writer of fiction is doing is conveying his or her subjective impression, in your own personal style. So your perception of the world around you, maybe it is an experience, that could be your subject matter, but the way you relay it, that would be your style. So I would say that yes, you can be you would be inspired as Sowvendra, being a doctor. What happens, you can't ignore the life around you when it is so urgent, when it is knocking on your on your mind, on your conscience, on your consciousness. Yes, but I think their real life experience or anything that you observe, it is, you transmute it with your imagination, because finally fiction is it's a work of artifice. It's something that you create. Another writer whom I'm fond of, Muriel Spark, she's a British writer, she said, fiction is an imaginative extension of the truth. Yes, the truth that you perceive, but you have to extend it imaginatively, either through your own style, either through some stylistic devices, or the meaning that you give it. Even Thomas Hardy said, fiction, it's a disproportioning of realities. So yes, reality, but you have to disproportion it. You have to kind of render it differently. So the imagination, I think, would take over, where your engagement with fact or with the real ends.
True. And it will invariably have some part of you in it, right? Your beliefs or your experiences. What I mean is it possible to write something completely objectively? Or, at some point would you relate to the experience and put some part of you there?
Actually, that's an interesting question, but it's very difficult to parse it very accurately. Yes, I would say that your sensibility or your mind is like a prism. All those experiences are refracted through your mind, through your sensibility. But what actually comes out on paper, what you write, that would undergo a process of transformation.
Okay. This is another question, which is, it's always a conflict. Any story should have a good plot and strong characterization. But when it comes to short stories, it's always a challenge to balance the both. So in your opinion, which works better? A short story which is plot-driven or character-driven? So, Mr. Sowvendra?
The short stories which I have written so far and which have been published, they are, I think, mostly plot-driven.
Plot-driven.
Because when you are taking things from real life, you cannot only do character-driven things, because something has to go somewhere. If that short story or any work is also character-driven, then it's a bonus. But I think my stories are mostly like plot-driven.
Plot-driven.
It has a beginning, there is some kind of a crisis in between, and then how it is resolved.
So is the crisis mostly external in your stories, or do you also bring out the turmoil or the dilemma inside the minds of the
So far it is
characters?
mostly external. There is one story in my collection, The Adivasi Will Not Dance, is called Desire, Divination, Death.
Okay.
Where the lead character, Subhashini, she is a woman from a village. She works at a rice mill, as a laborer at a rice mill at a small town little away from a village. Her son, I think he's 9 years old, I'm forgetting, but he's a small child, and he's running a high fever, and he wants to eat jalebis. Okay, so while she's at work, Subhashini, she's more, concerned about how is she going to go back home and how is she going to buy jalebis from the market as early as possible. So there is this conflict in her mind. What is going to happen to my son? Will I be able to, take those gifts to my son or not? And then, while she's returning home, she's walking home, she sees a child as old as a son, and there is no one else there on the road. It's totally like Sunsan Sannata, completely eerie kind of an atmosphere. And she wonders where this child came from. And that child, he asks her for jalebis, give me some jalebis to eat. And Subhashini, she does not know how this child, he came following her, and how does he know that she is carrying jalebis for her son. And then when she goes back home, I'm spoiling the story for all of you. When she reaches home, she sees that her son is dead.
Okay.
So yes, there is a plot in it, but there is also this, that inner turmoil inside Subhashini's mind. Who was that child?
Okay.
So it can be both, external as
External
well as
and
internal.
internal.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I want to go back and read that story. Yeah.
Haven't spoiled the story for us.
Yes, you
You've
made it
kind
more
of,
interesting.
Whetted our appetite for it.
It's a 5-year-old story. I'm not saying 20.
And Ms. Usha,
So-
how do you balance?
Okay, plot or character? I think I would throw the question back at the writer. What is your story about? Is it about an event, or is it about a character? So if it is character driven, there are questions that you as a writer will have to ask yourself. Are you going to give your character a psychology? Are you going to give him or her internal workings, some kind of turmoil, which you've done in your story also? And will it be in the first person? Will it be in the third person? You know, these are the questions that you would ask yourself if you're going to, if it is going to be character driven. Whereas if it is driven by plot, you would say, where is it set? So there, you have it in an Adivasi background in Jharkhand, is that right? And then how much, okay, what is the proportion, how descriptive will it be? And are you going to show or tell, you know, how much of the background would you have had to explain to the reader for them to understand what exactly the predicament is that your character is facing? How serious is it? Because a child asking for jalebi from his mother could mean different things in different settings. So I think these are the questions that you would have to ask yourself depending on the kind of story that you want to write. And and it will lead the way for you.
So there is no one size fits all
No,
here.
there isn't. And I'm sure it would be a mix. You know, it may be plot driven, but then you will find that you have a character who kind of, even maybe without your realizing it, the character takes over. Or you find that you had not intended it to be character driven, but you're spending time and talking about character.
And do you always limit the number of characters in your short stories to maybe 2 or 3 because of this constraint? I mean, if you have to be able to do
if
justice.
you're vis-a-vis your novel, you would.
Yeah.
Simply because if not, it would get very crowded.
Yes.
You wouldn't be able to do justice or explore your theme or even give to the character what the character deserves.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think the takeaway there is minimize the number of characters, and usually in a plot-driven short story too, would you limit the entire story to say the time frame of happening within a day or 24 hours or 36 hours, or does it last over a period of months or years?
See, that again, it depends on what the story is setting out to do. You know, we come back to whether it is like a novel which tells a story, which has a beginning, a middle and an end, and which could be expanded into a novel. Or is it something, it's just, an untrimmed slice of life, so to say. It is just an impression of a certain moment which you are describing very deeply. It depends on what you have set out to do.
Yeah. And Mr. Sowvendra, about the style of writing. There are 2 categories of writers from, the people I have spoken to or come in contact with. They say, some of them, they say they work under a strict framework. Like they have to have the entire plot and the characters, the time frame, everything jotted down, and they work within the framework. And there are some writers who say the story just writes itself. There is spontaneity. So when it comes to short stories, can you afford the luxury of spontaneity, or you have to work within a tight framework?
I think I have to work within a tight framework because time for me is luxury. So when I do not have enough time, I have to snatch time from whatever time I get. So there's usually a tight framework. When I'm working, when I'm not writing, I'm constantly thinking about the story. Maybe I'm making notes.
Okay.
Like when I was writing my first novel, The Mysterious Ailment of Rupee Basket, I used to travel from Jamshedpur, where my medical college is, and to my hometown, Ghatshila, 40 kilometers, on train or by bus. And at that time, we did not have smartphones. We had those old Nokia phones, and I used to take notes there. I used to save them as drafts.
Okay.
So I constantly think about, if I'm writing that is, if I'm writing, then I constantly think about what I'm going to write next, where my character is going, which place am I sending my character to, and what is happening to the character. And then when I finally am able to get some time, I write those down.
Okay. And from the story aspect itself, do you put the story on paper before you actually?
No, I write straight on my computer. No time to use
so
paper.
Okay. So it's not like you have all the points and then you elaborate
I have
on
my
each
points.
point.
I have my points. I have my point maybe in my phone or on my in my mind,
Okay.
and then I put it in my computer and also upload it on the internet on my Google Drive in case I lose it.
Has there been any time where you have surprised yourself? You just start writing and then as you write, you get ideas and the story just flows?
I have. I have. Although I cannot remember which story it was, because when I'm writing, I'm thinking about the story, so
Okay.
I cannot particularly name any story, but I think I have. Yes, I have.
Okay. And Ms. Usha, your take on balancing spontaneity versus writing a story within a strict framework?
Well, you know, the way I look at this is, not the conflict, but the two aspects of form and content. Yes, you have the ideas, as Sowvendra was saying. He is constantly thinking about it. And as all writers know, you're constantly thinking about your novel or your characters, even when you're going about very efficiently doing your day's work. They are there at the back of your mind,
Yeah.
and your story is writing itself. But finally, when you are going to put it on paper, you know, as far, especially as short stories are concerned, there's the American writer, a short story writer, Bernard Malamud. He said that form as the ultimate necessity is the basis of literature. You can't divorce form and content. So spontaneity, yes, but finally the way it works out on paper, there has to be a certain discipline. As far back as, say, the mid-19th century, Henry James, in an essay called The Art of Fiction, I mean, it's there on the internet if you are interested, he said the idea and or the story and the form, the way you're going to write it, it's like needle and thread. And he says, I haven't come across any guild of tailors who says that you can use the needle without the thread or the thread without the needle. So that kind of discipline is necessary, though we are constantly thinking about it, and I think the two go hand in hand. As you write more, I don't know, maybe Sowvendra will throw light on it, that even as you are thinking about it, you are thinking of the way it's going to be written. You know, even as the idea suggests itself, you will think of how you're going to work on it. Would you agree?
I think so. And actually, there's one thing I want to add about spontaneity in writing. This happened to me while writing a non-fiction piece. I was supposed to review a book of stories based on Dalit lives. So I pitched this idea, and I was told, instead of writing a review of only one book, why don't you do a profile of the publisher? Because this publisher is a new publisher, a new voice, and so I was asked to do it. And I thought, okay, maybe 1200, 1500 words. But as I started writing this piece, and as I started researching, because it was a non-fiction piece, I got so much material, I got so many insights that I ultimately ended up writing more than like 2600 words. So yes, spontaneity is always there.
It's always there.
It's always there. You never know, yes, and you are going to be surprised by how much you are capable of doing, how much you're capable of writing.
Okay.
So it happens.
So can we summarize it as probably spontaneity within a certain framework?
Yeah, as sometimes, as you said, spontaneity takes over. But you had a publisher who extended the word count for you. You know, like you could.
Not yet. And actually, when that work gets done, okay, you're not expecting your work to go in a certain way, but when it gets done, and it turns out good, it turns out okay, it feels so,
Yeah, you're satisfied.
You're so
with it.
satisfied, yeah. You're so satisfied, so happy that yes, even if this is not published, I have done it. This is an achievement.
Yeah.
I worked hard on it. So
And I've learned something.
I've learned something
in the process.
In the
yes,
process.
yes, I know.
And the next question, this is a question which I always ponder about. I myself have written a few short stories for Write India, and 3 of them have also been chosen in the top 10 slots. So this is about negative characters in stories, not necessarily negative characters, but flawed characters. So it's easier to it's easier to categorize characters as good or bad. But is non-judgmental portrayal of a flawed characters a challenge for every writer? And how do you manage to bring out the dark side of the protagonist, to evoke sympathy in the minds of the readers? Sympathy or empathy, rather.
I think whether you're writing about a positive character or a negative character, what I don't think any writer sets out to say, I'm going to write about a good person or I'm going to write about an evil person. So the first, the responsibility, I would say, if you can use such a heavy word, of the writer is to be honest, not to be manipulative, not to have all the, to kind of thrust a whole load of negative things onto one character so that your readers are going to hate him or her and then make somebody too good to be true. So the basic thing is to allow your characters to grow, and the growth should be organic. You follow the trajectory of their, you look at their experiences. Maybe something happened to them in childhood as a result of which they have turned out to be the way they have. Or they have experienced something and there are events or reactions which are beyond their control. So you start building a character with along those lines, rather than say should it be a positive character or a negative character. So you have to, you have to be true to your craft and maintain the faith. Keep the faith as a writer. That, I think, is important.
Do you have any favorite author or favorite works where you have actually admired a flawed character?
Charlotte Bronte, Wuthering Heights. You think of all those flawed characters that she has. And I think The Amazing Mr. Ripley. I don't know if I've got the title right, but it's about a criminal, a murderer who gets away with it, and and reluctantly, not wanting to, you admire the character and also the author, the way the author has managed to pull it off. I think it's called The Amazing Mr. Ripley. Yes.
So the way the author has portrayed the character,
yes,
is
and made him plausible and kind of, and since it's a crime story, she has worked it out in such a way that it is plausible, it's very convincing to the reader.
Okay. Mr. Sowvendra?
I have a flawed character who I love very much. There is Manjul Bajaj in the audience. First novel, Come Before Evening Falls, Rakha, very sexy man. Thank you.
Do you like to talk more about?
Yes.
Yeah.
When I write a character, I do not try to, make the reader, sympathize, empathize with the character. I just enjoy creating that character. For example, I have this short story called Eating with the Enemy in The Adivasi Will Not Dance. The protagonist is a woman named Sulochana. And she's bad in, the conventional sense, She gossips, she steals, she tells lies, she creates a ruckus. But she's so interesting. I love gossiping.
Don't we all?
I love gossiping, and I have also felt like stealing things which I cannot really own. So the thing is, I just try to put more spice into a character.
Okay.
I try to see myself in her.
Okay.
What am I going to do in her position? So it is all about making a character interesting, whether it's good or bad. That ultimately someone else, the reader,
Just
the
bring out the
critic,
human angle.
yeah, they have to decide, not you.
Okay.
So that's it.
Okay. And another question, which is always a challenge in short stories, um, conclusive ending of stories. Is it always possible to end a short story conclusively? And what's your take on inconclusive ending and leaving it to the reader's imagination or to the reader's inference? And will it work or has it backfired?
I think no reader should be spoon-fed. It's like what you reveal is it's like the iceberg where you just see 1/10 of it above the water, and that 1/10 may be huge. I mean, that's what brought the Titanic down. But the 9/10 of the iceberg is underwater. So you do, especially you want the reader to infer something, or you just give them enough clues so that they can take it forward for you. But at the same time, I'd say that if it is an inconclusive ending, it shouldn't, it shouldn't appear that the author has not worked hard enough, or the author doesn't know how to end it, or really doesn't care. It's like, how would I put it? It's like nude makeup, You have to work very hard to give the impression that you've not used any makeup. So even if it is inconclusive and you want to leave it to the authors to complete the story for you, you as the author have to work at it. There's this novel written in the 60s. I remember it was very popular, and it is The French Lieutenant's Woman by John Fowles. There was also a movie with, I forget her name, but you had, it was very well thought of, very well shot, and the author has more than one ending, suggests 2 or 3 endings, but it doesn't, I mean, you can see very clearly it's not because John Fowles has not been able to make up his mind. It is because the way in which, the tenor of the story, the characters, the events, they lend themselves to more than one ending. So it has been done, and it has to be done, it has to be crafted.
Yes. So the author still needs to do the homework, and
Yes.
sometimes it's more difficult to write an open-ended story than to write a conclusive story. So that's what you mean.
Yes, right.
So Sowvendra?
A story does not really need to have a proper ending. It can be a cliffhanger, it can be like my title story, The Adivasi Will Not Dance. It has the protagonist Mangal Murmu was protesting right in front of the president, being held back by the policemen, the security. What happens to him after that? Does his protest work? Does his protest do any good thing? Does the news about his protest spread around other places, and do people get inspired by what he did? All those questions are still in my mind, maybe in the mind of the readers. So not necessary that a story has to have an ending. Sometimes we just stop speaking and let the unspoken things.
Right, but you've provided enough information to stop speaking, so that you can stop speaking at
provide
some
enough
point.
information so that a scene is created, and then you leave the scene just like that.
Is there any story from other authors which has stayed with you and which makes you think about it even today, long after you have
There are a
finished the
lot.
story?
I'm not being able to recall any of them, but yeah, there have been stories.
Okay.
Yeah.
The actress was Meryl Streep, I remember now, in French Lieutenant's Woman.
Okay. Are such stories more likely to stay with the readers for a long time?
Yes, well, it stayed with me after, say, 20 years.
Yeah. Because there is more than one inference, and maybe it makes the reader think
Yes, that it does.
about the story even after they have finished reading it. Yeah. And next is about editing. How crucial do you think, you work as an editor, so how crucial do you think editing is to a short story? Because in novels you have the wiggle room where you can be more descriptive about a particular setting or an event. But in short stories, you really have to limit your descriptive part. So how crucial do you think editing is to a short story?
I think editing is crucial to any form of writing, whether it is a novel or a short story. But you have to be more even say if the writer is editing herself, I think you just have to be very focused and self-critical. What I always do is, after I've written something, I put it away for some time, and I come back to it after a while when the resonances are not fresh in my mind, and take a look at it to see how I can edit it, to see whether it is working the way I had intended it. But yes, writers are advised to be ruthless. You tend to have favorite sentences, favorite phrases, but ideally you should, the blue pen should hover over your page when you edit, and you should be ready to cut down things that should not be there in the first place. And if your work is workshopped or it reaches an editor, I think you should develop a relationship of trust with your editor. You should trust your editor, and remember that your editor is also on your side, and you both are working to make that object, that story, better.
So editing is a crucial
Yes, I would say it is.
Any story, short story,
whether you
or
do it
novel.
yourself or somebody else does it, it is.
Yeah. I'd just like to, share my experience. For Write India, usually the word limit is 3,000 words. So usually when I write my short stories, it overshoots by at least 6,000, 3,000 more. So it's always double. And then it becomes very painful to take out the remaining words. So I have always struggled with editing myself.
Right.
And I think for short stories, it's very difficult, because in a novel, you can afford to leave some things. But
Right.
you really have to trim your short stories
Right,
so that it can be crisp and concise.
Yeah.
So I personally think it's a challenge for short stories.
I think editing is very important.
Yeah.
Earlier, when I just started writing stories, I used to give a lot of info. But after I got published, I realized that yes, this is what works. Also, an editor's, not only an editor, but a reader who you can trust. A reader who can give you a very ruthless critique of your work. Their feedback really matters. And once you are published, once you have the idea that yes, this is how books should look, this is how a story should look, then I think you automatically start turning yourself in that way, which I have done. And if you are commissioned to do pieces by publications, then they often tell you this many words only, not more than that. Then of course.
So working within the word limit is that much more difficult.
If you have limit, if you have a given rationed amount of space, then you try to you learn to respect that space.
That's true. Yes.
As Usha said, make the best use of her resources.
And the next question is about the genre. Do you think any genre works for short stories, or do you have your favorite genres?
I have very difficult, differentiating between genres, because there are some murder mysteries which read like literary fiction. So I do not know what to say.
So
And my new novel, My Father's Garden, sometimes it might look like a college romance as well. So I really do not know.
okay.
I cannot talk about genres.
So you have your work spans
Spans, yeah.
across all genres.
Yeah.
Okay. So is it for short stories? Do you think it's difficult to write a particular genre?
I think for short stories it's difficult to put them in particular. I mean, short stories are a genre. Why again?
It's a genre in itself.
Why again genreify them?
Okay. And Usha, what's your take?
Yes,
on
I
it?
think a short story would work in any, thank you, 5 minutes to go, any genre. It could be science fiction or fantasy. There is so much fantasy which it suddenly seems to be in fashion, or literary fiction, anything. I think the short story is very versatile. It lends itself not only to different genres, but also to different forms. You know, you have the long short story, now you have flash fiction, which is just a few hundred words, and there is
Terribly tiny tales.
Yes, yes, terribly tiny tales. There's something called cell phone fiction, I believe. The Japanese and the Chinese are they're kind of promoting it, and I think soon we can look forward to Twitter short stories, Twitter fiction, 140, and now they've increased it to 280
Tweets.
Tweets as
Short
well.
tweets, yeah.
So I think it's versatile, and because it's short, it can do it can lend itself very well.
Okay. So, short stories are not limited by genre. You can write a thriller or
Or
romance.
form, yeah.
Or
You even
form.
have now short stories which, you know, are mobile friendly. There's an app so that you can read on your mobile. So
Okay. How much more time do we? 3 more minutes. We'll start the audience Q&A session. Does anybody have any question for our panelists? Right there.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very interesting session. I was thinking of something Usha said about the relationship of form and content, and that's something I think a lot about, and I think it applies to both Sowvendra and Usha. Basically, because I was thinking of your collection, The Adivasi Will Not Dance, because so many of the stories are about very gritty, even painful reality. Does that call for a sort of a more plain, straight shooting style? And Usha, your novel A Girl and a River is a great favorite of mine. There, I think also how you bring back a certain, what used to be called socialist realism. And socialist realism is a term which is used, it goes back to Lukács and the German critics, that, when you're talking about, to put it in, it's a complex term, but very simplified, when you're talking about very painful realities, you can't be flowery, you can't be ornate, you have to shoot straight. And I was wondering, because that is something which I think I go back and forth on. I'm not sure, but I can see the point. Is it a activist argument? Is it a literary argument? And yet writers have made that argument, and I think both of you have actually sort of dealt with the question in very different ways. In your, I don't know your stories, but you know your novels. In your novels, and I think in your stories as well as in novels. So I was wondering if you could say something about, is there a proper language for pain, as it were?
To answer off the cuff, I mean, I would think the more intense the emotion, or the more intense the event, or what you're trying to evoke on paper, the plainer your language would become, because there maybe you want to just say the minimum and leave it to the reader to reconstruct it. And also when the emotions are so intense, it's like silence in a film. When there is deep emotion, you don't really need any words. You don't need the emotional, the background score of violins screeching. So silence is something which says more than a lot of sound. So I think it would work that way too. And I'm sure you've grappled with it yourself, Shekhar, in your work. You said that you look at it, so it's something that all writers look at, and maybe you can't decide on it a priori, When you arrive at that passage, you would deal with it in a certain way. But at the same time, you're constantly aware of how you have written the rest of the novel. So are you going to dilute it there? Are you going to remain true to your style? These are all questions that arise. Yes.
Am I
yes.
please there?
I'm just saying it's also a political question sometimes, that when reality is so brutal, can we fancy around with, and yet we know that has also been done. That political reality doesn't necessarily, sometimes it's, I'm thinking of even French feminists, the way they wrote about gender politics, they played around. And yet, I think both of you have written very sort of realistic way. And I think I was wondering if you what your thoughts
Actually,
were.
Shekhar, all I can say is that of all the 4 books which I have written so far, I couldn't have written those in any other way. And especially my short stories, I think the theme of the short stories, the incidents that inspired me to write those short stories, I think they pulled me along. And that is where, again, the spontaneity thing comes in.
Yes.
You don't think too much, you just get carried along with the wave. And then you start seeing the way.
We have time for another question.
In the challenge of developing a character in a short story, Jhumpa Lahiri uses in Unaccustomed Earth. She uses the same characters, and over 3-4 stories, so she's able to develop the characters, and you have some. She has got more space to narrate the stories. What do you think about that technique?
So they are interconnected stories. Yes, you also have novels where some characters you pick them up again. Shashi Deshpande has done it in her recent novel, Strangers to Ourselves. She has characters from her previous novel. They appear in this novel, and yes, Jhumpa Lahiri does do it in Unaccustomed Earth. I think it depends on whether the writer can follow through, whether things have happened, things of worth have happened to your character, which which deserve the character to be kept alive or to be rejuvenated, resuscitated in another story, and whether you can carry it off, whether the writer can construct a new story around the character, new experiences, a new dimension.
I think we'll have to end the session. Do we have time for one more question?
Thanks for your valuable insights, firstly. My question is twofold. I'd like to pick your brain on these two things. So I'm someone who writes predominantly flash fiction and short stories. So would you recommend anyone who's like me that if they want to develop a novel or a story for a novel, would you recommend them to write a short story and then develop that short story into a novel? That's the first part. And the second part is I consider myself as a perfectionist. So I find myself spending a lot of time in editing and doing interviews for my articles. So is there any tips that you could provide on these two aspects?
I think I have only one tip. Read as much as you can, write as much as you can. You never know whether you're going to end up with a short story or a novel. You have the material, you have the time, you have that something inside you that is pushing you forward, you'll end up with a novel. If nothing, you'll end up with a short story. So just let your things take you along, okay?
Just one last question before we end the session to our panelists. Do you think short stories have a bright future?
Short stories have a bright future.
Okay. Because in today's world where attention span is diminishing.
I'm not saying it from a business point of view or whether short stories sell or not, because I cannot say about that.
From the angle of marketing.
Yeah, from that angle. But I love short stories.
Okay.
So in my mind, at least, short stories have a bright future.
Ms. Usha?
Yes, I think they do. They are, you need not necessarily have, it's difficult to read a novel, 300 pages maybe, or in e-form. But short stories, they lend themselves to different formats. You can read them online, you can read them on your mobile, so, and content-wise also, not just as Sowvendra says, from the point of view of people's, attention spans are diminishing. Not so. We still have people reading long novels, but it would give them variety. You can sample different writers, different genres. So yes, it does have a very bright future. That's what I think. You would have to get a publisher to answer that, actually.
Okay. All right, I think we will end the session, and thank you, Mr. Sowvendra and Ms. Usha.
Thank you,
and
Vani.
a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, dignitaries. Thank you for being such a pleasant audience.